So this is our second podcast from Ag Records, and it was going to be a weekly thing. I don't know if I always get confused when we describe things as bi-monthly or semi and that sort of thing. But anyway, we're going to try to do it every once in a while. How's that?
Semi-regularities.
Semi-regular. Okay, we'll call it that. I've got Vinny here with me. He's actually going to ask a few questions. And we've got the whole class out here, our audience, and hopefully they'll come up with a couple of questions in the interview. Not that I'm any kind of an expert on this. I know a lot of general rules. I always try to emphasize that, you go to the experts when it comes to really good sound tax advice. And that means you're probably, if you got a real profitable business, you're going to be talking to an accountant that's a CPA typically that can give you good advice, especially with your taxes. But and I use one to be honest. So I'm going to just turn it over to Vinny, and hopefully we'll get a few more questions beyond the first question. But fire away, Vinny.
All right. Well, recently we were just sitting in class, and before this podcast started, we were talking about the homework assignment that we were given. And there's a nice question came up of business entity. And actually, what are benefits that you know of having multiple business entities with the tax section 179 deductions?
Okay. Now, I'm assuming that you're meaning business entities like LLC, sole proprietorship, partnerships, C Corp, S Corp, that sort of thing?
Correct.
Okay.
All the above.
All right. Well, why would I kind of throw a little bit of a question back in the fact that why would anybody, you're operating a business, why would you want to partition it between different activities within your business? And I guess I'll answer that, is that in accounting, we talk about profit centers, and in agriculture, we actually call them enterprises. Okay, so they're the same thing. They can be they can be thought of as kind of standalone things that you could just do that function. Sometimes the entities are so small that you wouldn't be able to generate enough income in order to sustain a living or a profit and that sort of thing, or they're supplemental, supportive of some other business activity. And I give you an example. A lot of farms and ranches actually raise a lot of hay or some crops so that they can feed their livestock. They're actually two separate entities, two separate profit centers. But you may raise hay to sell in the retail market and feed your livestock, or you might just raise hay in order to feed your livestock. You see a lot of diversity in that sort of thing. And by actually committing yourself and putting those different activities into an entity, a legal entity, as say an LLC or a subchapter S or a partnership, you can actually track those particular activities a whole lot better. And I think with a finer pencil. And there's the tax code actually gives you a lot of advantage. We've been talking about in this class the 179 that you mentioned specifically, Vinny, and which enables you to deduct $1 million worth of asset purchases in 1 year. There's some advantages to that especially on a year which you show a whole lot of profits in that particular entity, right? So you could actually write off those asset purchases in 1 year. Now, always be thinking about the fact that if you take it all this year, then you might not have anything to write off or very little to write off in subsequent years. So that's one of the questions I ask anybody that comes to me with this kind of question is like, am I going to need those kind of deductions in the future? And if the answer is yes, then I want to probably depreciate particular assets in order to incorporate that into that entity. Now, just to kind of go a little bit further on the discussion, is that why would I set up different legal entities even though it's just a farm or a ranch or a business of some kind? And I've got these different activities that I'm doing. Well, the advantage is that for income taxes, and I could take more advantage of like the 179 that you asked about. I mean, each entity would be able to deduct up to $1 million in 179 deductions or depreciation in that case. And if you're a highly profitable business that's generating lots of profits from each one of your activities, then it becomes an extreme advantage to you by doing that. So, I mean, if you got 4 different entities, you can deduct up to $4 million. Now, there's some rules, and I always say this is why I started with the fact that I would always go to a CPA in order to make sure that I'm always legal and I'm not looking over my shoulder for any of the things that I actually put down on my tax forms. But and one of them is that I can't take the deduction typically. Say you've got a hay operation that supports a cattle operation. I feed all my hay to the cattle. Okay, the IRS looks at that with a suspectful type of eye. If I have the hay in an LLC and the livestock operation in an S corp, if I'm just supplying the livestock with that hay. Now, you can easily get around that by actually selling some of that hay. So if you've got surplus hay beyond what your needs are, then you can actually be viable in the fact as far as the IRS looks at it and that sort of thing. And there's some key things, and you need to be pretty detailed when you and that's why I would want a CPA actually to tell me exactly where I ought to be as far as maybe my outside sales for that hay operation would be. But both activities might be really profitable, and I might be able to take advantage of more tax planning with that sort of thing. Did I answer your question? I went on and on, didn't I?
Pretty good there. So since we're still talking about different entities or the business tax REN parts, are you able to actually divvy up like your enterprises if you have a hay situation or you're selling hay? Could you divvy it up between, change that and it was in like S corp? Could you move it to an LLC for tax purposes, and then instead of having hay go straight to your cattle and have that go between the 2 entities, or from the one entity, the hay to the cattle, could you divvy that up between 2 entities to where you have one entity to where you can take taxes off of your hay enterprise and then have that go to your cattle? And then so you're running 2 LLCs or S corps, however you want to set that up.
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure of the question, but I'm easily confused.
I'm easily able to put questions out there to confuse people.
Man, whip it on me.
You have one company that deals with hay and cattle. Mm-hmm. You're trying to split that up into 2 companies.
Okay.
Would that have tax advantages even if the one entity that was in the one company was not profitable? Do you still have tax advantages to split that up into a separate entity?
I see what you mean. Well, we'd have to actually look at the individual cases of that in order to actually answer that question. There's more reasons to actually separate some of your businesses up than just taxes too, into different entities. One of the things at this particular point in time, there's no reason to actually operate as a sole proprietorship unless you don't have any assets that anybody could litigate over. I mean, it's really hard to get blood out of a turnip, right?
Yeah.
So, but if you do accumulate some wealth in assets and that sort of thing, you should have those things in its own entity so that other outsiders can't actually get to them, or makes it a little bit harder in the court of law to get to them. If something were to happen, that somebody had some kind of could bring up a lawsuit against you, and then by separating your activities, you also protect certain assets from that lawsuits or any types of lawsuits along the line. I mean, it would be difficult for them to get at the livestock, say, if something went awry in the haying operation and somebody filed suit against you. I mean, they can name both entities as far as that goes, but they're less likely to, or the judge can throw out parts of that lawsuit in that case. So by having them separated, you protect yourself in that way. But I mean, the advantages that we've been talking about in class have been mostly, tax advantages. But again, if you're operating again as a sole proprietorship or a partnership that has extreme liability, it's just really not a really good business decision in this environment. Because especially after you've accumulated some wealth and some assets and that sort of thing. Should we ask the audience if they have any questions?
Well, that'd be a great idea. We have a very lively crowd out there.
It is. It's a Monday morning. Did some of that explanation, maybe, will it help you in answering that question?
I sure hope
An enthusiastic response there, Vinny.
Yeah. Sometimes you lead, sometimes you follow.
Right. Well, I mean, there's a third reason why, advantage to actually having several entities, okay, besides the liability and the tax advantages, is that we would have to keep a separate books for each one of those enterprises, right? And it makes it easier to analyze how that part of the business is doing. And I always ask people is like, do you know what it costs you per ton to raise your hay? And especially people that are just feeding it to their livestock. Would you? It takes a lot of time to put that hay up throughout the year. Would you be better? A question. I'm not saying yes or no, whether it's good or bad or anything like that, but would your time be better spent if somebody else could raise it cheaper? And a lot of times people come back to me and they say, well, we've got to have the hay. I need a regular supply of it, that sort of thing, or that particular crop, which is, an okay answer. But on the same token, I can go to my neighbor and he can say no, but I could ask him if he'll give me a 5-year contract on hay at a particular price or a window of pricing, or something like that. And I mean, people do it all the time. So you might be able to, do a guest ranch if you didn't have to put all your time into the, haying operation, for instance, and it might be a lot more profitable activity for you or any other type of operation. So, I mean, your time is really, really important. And that's one of the things that in an ag sense, most of us, it seems like our tongues are hanging out because we just don't have enough time to get around it all. Has that been the case for you, Andy?
Well, time management is normally a common topic that comes up with me.
Right. It's hard to hire the good people, right? And so a lot of the time you end up having to do everything. You really can't add something to the mix that you've already got. But maybe you ought to take a really close eye on what you're doing right now. Is it economically viable? Can somebody else do it better for cheaper? And those kind of questions are really important. And it might end up that you can raise hay cheaper than anybody else, and the convenience of having it raised right there might offset any other advantages you might get by getting it from somebody else. I can't tell you that without looking at your books and looking at your operation. Okay. Nobody's gone to sleep yet. But, I mean, is there any other question on that list of questions? And it probably looks a little bit intimidating if you haven't started yet. Is there any questions on that list? It's not meant to be that way. Actually, you can read some of the articles, and I don't want you to just cut and paste them, but kind of at least use some of your own language so that maybe it'll stick in your brain a little bit.
Well, seeing that the crowd has no questions and I'm falling short of figuring out more questions, thank you so much for your time, Mr. Jones.
You betcha. It's always a pleasure to be here. And you have a good Thanksgiving, baby.
Okay, you too.